right, welcome everybody. This is the last round of panels for the entire symposium. So for those of you watching, welcome. You are now christened to be grognards. Grognards is a French word for grumblers. They were Napoleon's favorite and best troops. He said grognard with a sense of praise. They were the ones that hung with him till the very end. That's you. And when he needed something hard done, he called on his grognards, and they always came through for him. So welcome to the Grognard Club. We have three speakers today. I get to do double duty, and we're going to talk about models, methodologies, and unbound potential for innovating in national security. So these three papers are high-level looks at innovation in DoD. So three different views. I think this is the wise man looking at the elephant kind of thing. It's a snake, it's a tree, it's a wall, and you as the audience get to figure out, integrate across the three of us and come up with your own conclusion. So what we'll do is I'll introduce each speaker, except for myself. I won't introduce myself. And each speaker will have about 15 minutes to talk about their material. We'll hold questions to the end, and we'll have about 15 minutes for questions. So please use your Q&A button to ask questions. I'll be coordinating the questions. I'll try to consolidate them where I can, and we'll run through to the end of the session. So congratulations, hang in there, and we'll get started with William Greenwalt, who of the American Enterprise Institute, and former SAS staffer. Congratulations, you got your survivor's badge for that, and then a former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Industrial Policy. You have my sincere thanks for having served penance in the Pentagon on the OSD staff. So knows the system well, and now gets to sit a little bit on the outside and make good informed comments based on personal experience. So over to you, Bill.
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, I don't know. I'm a glutton for punishment. I went to serve 3 terms up in different places on the Hill, so I'm much happier here. I'll tell you that for sure. All right, so let me start. First of all, I want to thank the Naval Postgraduate School for the opportunity to present this paper. This work really reflects my guiding principles and worldview as I pursued acquisition reform policies in Congress, in DoD, industry, academia, pretty much over the past 40 years. The paper presents a proposed taxonomy of innovation terms. I start with a definition of defense innovation, move on to the systems where innovation can occur, identify the enablers and barriers to such innovation, and surprise, they are the same factors, and then move on to the types of innovation that can occur. I conclude that DoD since World War II has pursued a number of innovation types in defense acquisition. Disruptive, revolutionary, and time-based innovation primarily occurred in the early Cold War period until it was primarily replaced in the 1960s by an incremental, proactive, sustaining model. This model has dominated U.S. acquisition ever since. And to compete, I think we need to, in the future, is to look to some of those other potential defense innovation approaches that were more time-based and disruptive and more integrated with the commercial innovation system. So I'm going to try to go quickly through a number of charts to spend a little more time on innovation types. So let's start with the definition of innovation. Next slide. So I'm looking at defense innovation as not invention. Invention is basic research, developmental prototyping. What I'm defining is one of 9 different enablers of innovation. For me, innovation is capability space. And this is something you can measure. It's a thing or process that provides advantage over a previous iteration. It's real capability, usable by the warfighter and also able to be tested in the marketplace as a commercial item. In DoD, the first indication of innovation is operational prototyping, with a capability that can be left behind and used operationally. The first deployment of our national missile defense system would meet this criteria. In the commercial world, the concept of minimally viable product is the one I would be looking at, and such as the first iPhone that was sold. So where does all this innovation occur? Next chart. I start off with proposing a foundation of one overarching international innovation system comprised of separate domestic innovation systems. And these domestic innovation systems can be self-sufficient or cooperate with one another. And you can measure that by the degree of trade and globalization or successful military alliances and the interlapping between the various domestic innovation systems. Next slide. Within each domestic system, there exists a commercial and a governmental defense system that normally act in parallel and separate from each other. These systems are first displayed as here in the chart as tangential to one another and not interacting. This reflects much of the peacetime history of the U.S. prior to World War II. The military system valued the independence of its government-controlled and operated arsenals and shipyards. And it was really only in wartime that major interaction between the commercial and military innovation systems occurred at scale. In peacetime, that interaction was usually limited to the commercial system selling raw materials into the defense system as if it was any other commercial customer. Next slide. A third distinct and often superior domestic system occurs when interactions incentivize between the commercial and defense systems that can be described as civil-military integration. As the U.S. has found out in its economic history, when the commercial and government systems are encouraged and incentivized to interact, some truly amazing leaps in innovation can occur. It's primarily during longer conflicts that a greater innovation of this type of integration was allowed to take place. After these conflicts ended, the two innovation systems drifted apart and became separate again. During these periods of wartime commercial and military cooperation, a push-pull dynamic occurs that immediately leverages commercial technology into the military side while initiating a slower pace of diffusion of military technology to the commercial side. Over the subsequent intervening period of time between conflicts, this technology is then modified in the commercial sector and improved upon by market forces. I think two of the biggest examples of this over our history taking place were the early 1800s work at the Springfield Arsenal to develop interchangeable parts. This led to the American system of manufacturing, which returned to the military side through the production capacity of the arsenal democracy in World War II. The second was the miniaturization of electronics that were conducted for 1950s ICBM nuclear weapons and radar programs. Out of that sprouted Silicon Valley, and we've been bringing back that technology that Silicon Valley has been nurturing for the last several decades through various acquisition reform initiatives. At times in U.S. defense economic history, the commercial sector has been the lead change agent for technological advancement, and at times the military systems drove that innovation. Okay, next chart. Let's talk about innovation enablers, the factors behind innovation. In this section, 9 factors are considered that can enable, or as often the case, serve as barriers to innovation. These are diffusion, invention or research, culture and politics, the industrial base, workforce, the legal and regulatory environment, and this includes the management regimes that we all know and love, like acquisition, budget, requirements, contracting, security frameworks, export controls, and so on. Then we have leadership, finance, think Wall Street, venture capital, and private equity, and time. We could probably spend several hours, which we of course don't have, talking about each of these enablers, but the key point to be made is that each of them are more often than not can serve as barriers to innovation, as rarely do we get the right policies in these areas to enable innovation. These enablers are all related and interact with one another. Effective policy designed to enable innovation are necessary in each of these areas, and an understanding of their interactions required to prevent them from becoming brakes on future innovation. Okay, next slide. So innovation types. Where does innovation happen and doesn't happen? And I think this is the more interesting part of the paper. And the intellectual foundations for these concepts reside with Clay Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma, Carl Benedict Fry in his book Technology Trap, of course, Deming, and my work with Dan Patt, former DARPA guy from on Competing in Time, and now a report we just put out, Required to Fail, the requirement system. So, and I want to make sure we got the right slide up. Yes, we do. Sorry. In this proposed construct, there are 7 innovation types or strategies that can be pursued. A key variable in many of these strategies, as they are in Christensen's analysis, is the degree in which culture change is required. Stasis is the starting point, and I will return to this later, and can be described as the status quo innovation state. Minimally sustaining and incremental proactive sustaining are 2 types of strategies comparable to Clay Christensen's sustaining model of innovation, where innovation happens as a way of maintaining one's competitive advantage and one's underlying culture and outlet does not change. So in this proposal, minimally sustaining is a reactive type of a type. It's the minimal amount required to maintain one's market position or perceived balance of power. Incremental proactive sustaining is a planned linear approach designed to limit risk and also limit innovation as a way to limit costs. We essentially are already ahead and just need to do enough to try and hedge against a competition overtaking us. We don't want to waste resources or innovate too much to cause instability. And this basically concept has been our current acquisition system since about the mid-1960s. Time-based innovation strategies, both reactive and proactive, can straddle Christensen's sustaining and disruptive concepts. Time-based reactive is emergency procurement. This happens during conflicts and wars and was most recently seen through rapid acquisition approaches we used in Iraq and Afghanistan to defense against counter IEDs. Time-based proactive is forcing time to innovate. It's time-based acquisition. 1950s incremental acquisition, as seen in the B-52 and other various weapon systems that we did. We went through a series of serial operational prototyping that led to significant advances in technology. Or we've also seen this in the commercial implementation of Moore's Law, or we've seen it with the iPhone. It's a time-based process to deliver new capabilities based on the forcing function of time. At the right-hand side of this equation is a revolutionary step change in disruptive approaches. Much innovation can be incremental, but over time it can be significant, as we've seen with the iPhone, as we've seen with various other incremental approaches. How significant is measured by how much better it was than before, but also by its impact. Does it change does it change that underlying culture? So I define revolutionary step change as significant, but not quite as substantial as the change that occurs through disruption. But most importantly, it doesn't change the underlying culture to the degree that disruption does. Advances in hypersonics might be better seen through the prism of the missile defense culture, but still could offer significant capability increases. So it may be revolutionary, but it may not be disruptive. A disruptive strategy is an order of magnitude improvement in the quality of innovation, but serves to undermine the underlying culture and outlook. And I look at 2 types of disruption to consider. One is an order of magnitude, better, faster, and cheaper capability than the existing solution. That's something that the commercial side looks at what is disruptive innovation. And reusable rockets and cheap drone technologies appear to be not only revolutionary, but disruptive and frankly meet Clay Christensen's definition of what is disruptive. But there's a second disruptor that mostly occurs in defense. And these are the never been done before moonshots that actually succeed, but they're not necessarily cheaper than the existing solution, but they are much better or faster. So the first ICBMs, the first satellites, nuclear weapons, nuclear-powered submarines are candidates for this defense type of moonshot disruption. In the future, we may see AI and directed energy be a part of this type of disruption if they're successful. So next chart. I want to talk about stasis because I think this is really the natural order of things and what really drives or doesn't drive the innovation cycle. Let's put it that way. Stasis is the status quo. It's what most interests and are most comfortable with and often prefer. So while the innovation type chart, the preceding innovation type chart appears to outline innovation as a seemingly progressive order, the reality is that innovation, even in its most non-disruptive forms, creates a backlash and a desire to return back to stasis. Innovation thus may better be described as a circle or a cycle. What once were highly disruptive innovative capabilities eventually are absorbed into stasis, absorbed into the culture, and become the new status quo. These technology processes become entrenched, and then barriers are erected around them so as not to be disrupted by something else. So the cycle of innovation begins with stasis or the status quo. And after all the turmoil or disruption caused by something new, the system wants to revert back to the new status quo and put up barriers and to protect itself from this new innovation. In the technology trap, Carl Benedict Frey brilliantly describes the situation over history. Stasis is the political default choice for governments, dominant industrial firms, labor, and the financial community. The enablers of innovation become barriers. Processes and laws are created to limit and control innovation and maintain the status quo. The political and economic interests aligned against disruptive innovation oftentimes leads to decision gridlock and an embracement of what is current. So essentially, labor wants to maintain its jobs, industry enjoys market dominance, finance profits from all of this. This looks like how one would be lobbied up on the Hill. In this environment, the question is, why change? Well, the problem is that stasis lasts, how the longer the stasis lasts, the greater the chance of such a system being disrupted. And most likely it'll come outside the domestic innovation system, as we're seeing outside some other domestic innovation system like China is more than likely going to disrupt us. So here's the next and last slide. So using this taxonomy, the history of US innovations, I think, can be assessed. And so the post-World War II period was a watershed moment for US defense innovation. The past cycle was broken. The system did not return to stasis after the conflict. And this period of time-based disruptive innovation did not last long, at most 20 years. It became the most innovative period in US history and the source of some of the most significant military technologies still in use today. The 1960s became a transition decade. In the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis and the rise of arms control measures to try and manage conflict, military innovation entered a stasis period with a planned, proactive, incremental sustaining strategy. So think PPBE, think 5000 series, think what eventually became the JCIDS process and military requirements process. We created a system as a hedge against technological breakthroughs from the Soviet Union, but it was planned, it was incremental, it was very centrally controlled. But even the end of the Cold War saw this sustaining strategy even rolled back. So then the global war on terrorism encouraged some new emergency time-based reactive measures that were reversed once the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan ended. Sustainment type innovation strategy in US dominance began to be tested in 2014 by the invasion of Crimea and the Chinese militarization of disputed islands in the South China Sea. Congress reacted when I was up there working with Senator McCain by providing a series of time-based disruptive innovation strategic tools through the expansion of other transaction production and rapid acquisition authorities, the strengthening of the commercial item preference, the establishment of middle-tier acquisition authority, and the creation of the software acquisition pathway. Unfortunately, the last decade has seen only marginal uses of this authority and little disruption. So as we face the future, defense and innovation in the US needs to think where it wants to be on these steps. Does it want to continue to focus on predictive process-based incremental sustaining innovation? Does it want to move out to more disruptive time-based? Does it want to take advantage of the growing trends in commercial innovation systems through civil military integration? This will all require a change in culture, mindset, and processes. And the ingrained, culture resistance to all of this and the ways of doing business is obviously something that we have to try to overcome. Because if not, we'll end up moving back to stasis. So with that, I think I don't know where I am at time, but hopefully I get some time back, and look forward to any questions that we have in the latter presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was awesome. That was great. Actually, what I am about to present dovetails really nicely with your work. So, like I said, I'd like to follow up with you.
Great.
So,
Thanks. Thanks.
why don't we go into? I think I'm next. Um, so, why don't we call out my stuff? I spent 41 years active duty in the U.S. Navy, and was a professor, full-time professor to practice here at MPS for a while. Industry made me an offer. I couldn't refuse, so I took it. I'm still with industry, but I'm an intermittent professor to practice at MPS, and I teach some acquisition courses here. So if we go ahead and get my stuff up on the screen. My paper is Prometheus Unbound, in case you missed your Greek history, mythology. Prometheus was a Titan, who was a pre-god, who gave man the knowledge of fire, which is generally interpreted to be knowledge in general. And he was punished by the Titans for doing this by chaining him up, and an eagle came and did bad things to him every day, and he was healed every night, and then he got to do it again. Kind of a Sisyphus sort of thing. And I argue here that the U.S. Navy unbound Prometheus through leadership and organizational structure and organizational learning, which led to the United States Navy becoming the greatest naval power in the world for a very long time. And we have since chained Prometheus back to the rock, and we have lost the ability to gain new knowledge. So next page, please. First off, terminology, and this dovetails nicely with what Bill is saying. Invention is not adoption. Invention is making something, sitting on a lab somewhere, not necessarily very useful. Adoption is the bringing an invention into general use within a community of practice. So that's what I focus on here is adoption. Adaptation is taking a thing which has been adopted and then using it in a way that is not in accordance with its initial purpose. The best example I can think of this is the Easy Bake Oven. No inventor of the incandescent light bulb ever considered it to be a heat source to cook cupcakes for 7 and 8, 9-year-old children, which is what an Easy Bake Oven is. So that is an adaptation of the electric light bulb in a useful way, which has made millions of children happy. Revolution Military Affairs is a collection of adoptions and adaptations which fundamentally change the nature of war. A good example, there's many, but a good example is Blitzkrieg, the combined armored warfare. People say, well, that's tanks. Well, before World War II, everybody had tanks, but only 2 countries came up with Blitzkrieg, and Stalin was one of them, and Germany was the other one. Stalin shot all the generals that knew how to do it, so they forgot, and so you ended up with one country. And RMA for Blitzkrieg is tanks plus aviation plus radio plus mechanized infantry plus integrated artillery fire. So those combined together to produce Blitzkrieg, which was a true revolution in military affairs. So there is a difference, and I try to stay close to that terminology. Next page, please. So here's an example of adoption moving at different speeds. On the left, you see the Moskva before it sank. In less than 6 months, the Ukrainians figured out how to attack a first-rate warship with a drone and sink it, and it worked. On the right, you see an MQ-8B, the first of 2 uncrewed helicopter UAVs. 8 or 10 or 20 were built. It was used for 10 years. An MQ-8C was fielded. Again, 20 or 30 were built. It was used for a few years. 22 years later, really never was used, and they're all being retired. So both really great ideas. One of them was prosecuted effectively in a combat environment, and the other one languished. And Eric Schmidt's quote there for testimony is a key point here. The Department of Defense does not have an invention problem. It has an innovation adoption problem. We have lots of inventions. We cannot transition them into the operational forces. And the MQ-8B is a good example of that. And the drone, the Ukrainian drone, is a good example of how to do it right. Next page. So the United States Navy started by fielding the world's most powerful frigates in 1794. We were frankly, nickel dime little nation, coastal navy. Actually, the Navy was part of the Army back then. But a bunch of pirates in North Africa started capturing American ships and sailors. And Congress said, hey, we need some ships to go get rid of them pirates. You don't need much of a ship to stop piracy. But Joshua Humphreys and the United States Navy decided they were going to go all in, and they built the first 6 frigates. Constellation there in Boston Harbor would be one that's still around. And that frigate incorporated revolutionary shipbuilding technology for the day. And those ships were built to fight and defeat Royal Navy frigates. And they did later in the War of 1812. So an audacious Navy started out by building this tremendously powerful ship and set the standard for Navy operations for the next 250 years. Next page. Navy was born to innovate. And that continued. In the Civil War, the Confederacy started to build an ironclad. The United States Navy, the Secretary of the Navy recognized that was a real problem. In less than 100 days, the Union Navy fielded 3 ironclads, one of which defeated the CSS Virginia and set the tone for U.S. Navy innovation. And then subsequently, the New Steel Navy in 1881, unfortunately backward Navy, had achieved stasis. New word I got from you, Bill. Thank you. Knocked us out of stasis, fielded a New Steel Navy in less than 10 years, built the first U.S. Navy battleship. That rolled almost immediately, and that Navy won the Spanish-American War and fought effectively in World War I. That in turn turned to a modern Navy, aviation, submarine, torpedoes. In 20 years, BuAer fielded 62 different models of airplanes in 20 years. The airplanes that fought in the Pacific War in World War II were not rationally derived. I'll give you the definition of that word in a minute. They were the result of 20 years of incremental development that produced a truly awesome Navy. And that became a Navy second to none. And that Navy continued on to dominate the world. You see the effect of nuclear power there. Say in 7 years, the U.S. Navy fielded 24 nuclear powered ships, 11 classes of submarines, which included a nuclear cruiser, and a nuclear aircraft carrier, and 2 classes of ballistic missile firing submarines, things that had never existed in less than 7 years. Since 2000, the United States Navy has fielded 2 warship designs, 1 fighter, and 1 submarine. And I'm being generous with the fighter because that's a Joint Strike Fighter, which was started before 2000, and the Virginia-class submarine, which was started before 2000. So compared to the history before 2000, so 225 years, the performance of the last 25 has been dismal. Next page. In case you missed it, we're in the 4th Industrial Revolution. They're on the bottom right. The first Industrial Revolution was a little tough on the Navy, but we figured it out as I described. Second Industrial Revolution was steel, aviation, internal combustion engines, torpedoes. Did really well with that. Third Industrial Revolution, digital computers, nuclear power, did awesome with that. Now, the fourth industrial revolution is edge to cloud, virtualization, autonomy, uncrewed vehicles, artificial intelligence, big data. Not doing so good with that. So, what changed? Next page. And everybody's noticing. Among the many thousands of quotes available, here's one from former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta. I won't read it, give you a minute to look at it, but rapid adoption is the key. They notice that we are failing to adopt new technologies. They're prevalent in the commercial world. Why aren't they being used in the naval world? Full disclosure, the company I work for now built the autonomous ship you see in the picture. Next page. So it turns out there's two ways of approaching technology. First is exploration, which is adopting new technologies. And the second is the one that Bill talked about, which is improving known technologies. And those are different skill sets. And what has happened, I hypothesize, is the Navy was very good at exploring new technologies, Navy leadership, Navy organizations, released Prometheus, taught the Navy how to explore new technologies like ironclad technologies, steel, aviation, nuclear power, missiles, digital radars, and those sorts of things, and brought those into the fleet. Since then, though, the Navy has focused on improving known technologies. So the force you see today, F-18s, they were fielded in 1972. Virginia-class submarines are essentially Los Angeles-class submarines, jacked up a lot. Aegis ships have been in service since the 1980s. And on and on and on. Incremental improvements. Most of the ship platforms we have in service today are more than 40 years old. Exploiting new technologies, not exploring new technologies. Next page. Fred Brooks, who led the software development team for the IBM 360, the first mass-produced computer, hypothesized two approaches to design. The first is a rationalist, believes a man is inherently sound and reasonable and produces an inherently good design. And all we need to do is reason that good design into perfection. The alternative, which Brooks prefers, and I prefer, is the empiricist. Man is flawed. People are flawed, excuse me. People are flawed and produce flawed designs. And therefore, the design methodology is to learn how to determine the flaws in a design and incrementally improve it over time to make it better. Next page. So you see on the upper left is the rationalist view of design, which is the waterfall model, which is what is inherent in the DoD processes today. Set a requirement, design to that requirement, and then field it in the forces. The design is perfect because it was done by good people. And so a fixed requirement will produce a competent design, which will produce a useful product, as opposed to what the Navy did for 225 years, which is on the right, which is what Silicon Valley rediscovered, which is propose a concept, build it, measure its performance, learn from that, iterate on that, and potentially field it, but maybe not, maybe not. Bill talked about the iPhone. iPhone 1 was not a very good device, but it was good enough to be iterated on. iPhone 3, 5, 7, 9, 10, and on. And then you see Steve Blank's customer development model on the lower left-hand corner. So the Navy used to use BML and customer development model and did well. Now we use product development model and not doing so well. Next page. I'll skip this. Next page. And I'll conclude with this. So the circle on the right is what I've described with a build, measure, learn model, leading, executing, embodying adoption. through an exploring organization, through an empirical process, and a custom development model, which is what the Navy used for 225 years, what the Navy is not using today. A couple of pictures on the lower left. There's a submarine launching a missile from the surface. Good idea, really bad plan. So they don't do that. So one of the iterations in BML was to let's have it launch it underwater, where a submarine is much more comfortable. On the far left, you see a heavy cruiser shooting carrier missiles, big ship, big missiles. Seems like a good idea. Turns out not so good. So instead of a 20,000 ton cruiser launching missiles, today we have 7,000 ton frigates and destroyers launching missiles. Much better model, much better use of resources. So thank you very much. That concludes my talk. And here you see Neil Ferguson, economist, and Condoleezza Rice talking about our problem at hand. Okay. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jeff, Commander Jeff Legg, doctorate in business. I didn't know you could do that, so I learned something. Also an NPS graduate, currently stationed at FRC in San Diego. So he's, as he told me a few minutes ago, his inaugural tour in naval aviation, which is quite eye-opening. And he's done some excellent work on technology adoption. So over to you, Dr. Jeff.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to speak here. I think I'm last, hopefully not least, following these two very experienced and knowledgeable gentlemen. So this presentation is a summary of my doctoral dissertation research, and I'll spare some of the dryness of it, but again, big shoes to follow going after these two guys. So basically, a qualitative exploration study of methodologies used to measure technology maturity in DoD non-ACAT 1 programs. I realize that's a mouthful. The gist of it is basically the ACAT 1 level programs within the DoD are very structured and formalized on how to assess technology maturity. The research suggests and findings support that within non-ACAT 1, ACAT 2, ACAT 3, and lower, that rigidity and that formal structure does not exist. And as I show you, we're going to present some research that supports that and possibly suggest how we can address those issues. Next slide, please. So this agenda, boilerplate, I'll skip that. A little bit about me again, the Doctor of Business Intelligence. This is my doctoral research, but we can skip that too. So getting right into it, this research basically used case studies with a sample population that I'll get into. Next slide, please. This is some background info. I imagine for this audience, this is nothing basically earth-shattering, but it does provide the baseline for my research. So again, ACAT 1, for those of you who don't know, greater than 3 billion, ACAT 2 and 3, below less than 3 billion. Technology maturity, at least in the sense of a DoD definition, the given technology readiness level. If you're familiar with TRL and TRAs, this will ring very true. And it's important to note that this research is based on the fact that TRA is not mandated for ACAT 2 and 3 programs with the DoD. Next slide, please. So why is this important? Because without any standardized or codified technology, the majority of your acquisition programs, which ACAT 2 and 3 do represent the majority in terms of funding dollars, you increase risk and cost, schedule, and performance overall. And this, as we know, leads to potentially resulting in increased taxpayer costs and decreased readiness. This is not my proposal. This is not my finding. This is GAO, which repeatedly said this in regards to DoD executions. So again, why is it important? And as new threats in the global landscape emerge and evolve, just as these two gentlemen have pointed out, will become increasingly reliant on technology, and accurate readiness assessments of that technology will be critical. I don't think there's any doubt in that. Next slide, please. So without getting too much into the text, this is a qualitative case study, and I chose the Defense Acquisition University personnel to perform these qualitative interviews. So based on their experience, and I'll get into that a little bit, we're trying to figure out how these readiness assessments were executed, even though not mandated. How were they executed within these lower level programs? And I'll get into the findings of that. But the point of this research was to identify commonality amongst these methodologies and provide a set of best practices to measure technology maturity. I'll say this once and I'll probably say it again. My research was very, very exploratory and fundamental, and it really scratched the surface in what could lead to an opening for further research within this area. Next slide, please. So why was this important? Again, getting into the research and identifying research gaps, which I'll address in a future slide. There's really little to no guidance on how to assess technology maturity for these smaller programs. And as I said before, this leads to second and third order effects. And it really failed to reveal the impact of inaccurate technology assessments because we don't have the data for these level 2 and 3 programs to show how technology maturity and the effectiveness of these technology maturity assessments affect overall program performance. And I think that really, that linkage is key. The amount of research focusing on ACAT 1 level programs and the TRLs and the TRAs that go into those, really the data is present, and there's been a significant amount of research showing the correlation between conducting those assessments and the effectiveness of those programs long term. We don't have that data readily available for these smaller programs. Again, I think that would be a huge opportunity for subsequent research within this field. So why is this beneficial? Why is this type of research beneficial? Obviously, people within the ACAT 2 and 3 programs, the DoD participants, contractors, et cetera, this would all be very beneficial to them. Acquisition research institutions like DAU, NPS, et cetera, they could all benefit from this type of research. And obviously, as a military organization, we're using taxpayer money to pay for these programs. We need to be stewards, good stewards of those funds. Next slide, please. So what is the research question? Again, very straightforward. What methodologies are used to measure technology maturity for this? Specifically, we're looking at an analysis of alternatives. I'll kind of break this down. If, for example, we're presented 2 different potential solutions, how are we going to assess the technology maturity of each solution? What is a effective technology readiness assessment for analyzing these solutions in order to take it down the road, as these 2 gentlemen have pointed out in their past briefs? So a couple of data points for the demographics within this. We collected the respondents' service affiliation and the respondents' acquisition experience. Again, years in position, all of them were GS grades, and I'll show you that subsequent slide, but also their association with failed programs. We didn't want this to be attributional, so we provided anonymity for these participants. So next slide, please. Again, an exploratory study, used data triangulation, basically boilerplate qualitative research. A lot of government academic research focused on DoD level, ACAT 1 level programs. This was identified as a research gap. When we looked through both government academic research, little to no sources supporting ACAT 2 and 3 execution. So conducted a focus group and analysis through qualitative software. And again, the goal was to identify themes, relationships, and commonalities. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the participants. This is kind of the analysis of the participants. Again, DAU personnel, over 700 staff within DAU. We were able to, based off a pre-interview questionnaire with relevant experience, identify 61 eligible candidates, and 14 responded and 8 were willing to conduct this interview. And as you can see, the demographic slice and dice on the right there. Again, very senior level GSs with significant amounts of experience within the DoD acquisition programs. Next slide, please. These were the interview questions used to basically collect the data for this. Again, all qualitative, very simple questions. Again, a lot of potential for taking this research even further. I won't read these out loud, but next slide, please. So what were the results? This was done using virtual software, and all of the transcripts from these interviews were put into ILS-TI. ILS-TI is a qualitative analysis tool used for sentiment analysis and other ways to basically take transcripts and conduct data analysis with it. So within that analysis, we identified 4 initial coding themes, and these are them. Again, I won't read them, but these were the foundation for the qualitative analysis within this research, and to get to the themes and commonalities within this research. We go to the next slide, please. So again, this is a lot for this style of presentation, but the results presented, as seen, there was typical themes, there was inter and intra relationships between these themes, and different tiers of these themes between these different interviews and their responses. Take a few seconds for that to digest. And then next slide, please. Again, this is just a pictorial analysis of these, or a pictorial representation of the analysis of these themes. But I'd like to take the time to get to the conclusions of the recommendations. So next slide, please. So what did the analysis show? So again, as I said, literature reviewed numerous methods. Very few methods were presented by the interviews, and this was a little bit surprising. I think that leads to some of the conclusions and recommendations to see in the following slide, but I want to keep that in mind that there really is very few responses provided by the interviewees. So I don't think this is a surprise either, but the high frequency of agile and customer input, it really is showing how the DoD is transitioning to a greater focus on incorporating user input into maturity assessments. The best example of this, I think, was the Army Soldier Touchpoint, something I had never heard of, but after looking into the research and getting into further examples used by the Army, I really think this is reflective of how we're transitioning to, again, more agile customer input themes. In my experience, agile was mainly focused on software development, but the Army's taken it to the next level in terms of its material requirements and larger programs, not just software. So the interview data all support the transition to a more robust assessment methods. The speed of relevance is a huge concept within DoD acquisition. And I think as we're showing, as our programs become more and more complex, our traditional assessment methods, specifically the TRL, are outdated. And they don't support the assessment that we need for these more interconnected and complex programs. And last but not least, I think we have I think the analysis showed that we have a real lack of consolidated and aggregated data available for this research. And there are a lot of constraints that exist in executing assessments. So while the interviewees responded that they would love to have more robust and more articulated assessment methods, the DoD just doesn't support that with the constraints that exist in executing these assessments. So there's definitely an appetite. It's just identifying these obstacles and getting these assessments conducted. And then last slide, please. I'm sorry, analysis continued. So transition to a greater focus on incorporating user input again. This has been supported by a multitude of both qualitative and quantitative research within the last few years, again, as these programs become more complex and more interconnected. These are some very relevant articles that you can feel free to read. And then last slide, please. Sorry, one more. So the limitations, again, it's important to identify limitations within each types of research, because you may think that your framework is irreproachable, but oftentimes it's not. So it's important to identify limitations within your own research. So all services of DoD were included, represented from these DAU personnel. They did not include other federal non-DoD services. So while we live and die by the FAR, it's important to recognize that other federal non-DoD services also are doing this level of acquisition, and it may mirror other themes and commonalities that we found within this research. And as with all qualitative research, it assumes honest answers from participants. There's really no way to validate the legitimacy of what they're providing in terms of their responses. And in order to maintain anonymity and a non-attributional direction, you really don't want to go down this path. So you have to assume that the answers are honest. And it did not account for personnel employed by multiple services. Within the research, you often have DoD personnel who are involved in multiple different services with different experiences. And because of the limitations between time and just how deep you can actually go within this research, we limit it to one service per interviewee. Next slide, please. There we go, recommendations. So again, as I said, this really only scratches the surface and identified the research gap within this particular area. I do think there's a massive opportunity for future research for this. And these are some of the recommendations for other types of research that could follow along here, both quantitative and qualitative. And this assumes that the people conducting the research will have access to the data, particularly within the acquisition systems. That was a recognized challenge in getting quantitative data to support corollaries between conducting an assessment and the overall effectiveness or success of a program. Next slide, please. So conclusions and implications. So again, little to no commonality or framework touching these technology assessments. I think that's been pretty much beat. And then the ineffectiveness of TRL method. This was one of the common themes brought back from the respondents is like, hey, we have an identified assessment method for ACAT 1. We try to apply it to these lower programs. It just doesn't work. And oh, by the way, the TRL method, which was developed in the 60s, is just not relevant. We have to find an updated way to do this. And last but not least, again, there's a significant literature and research gap in looking at technology maturity assessments for all ACAT 1 or all ACAT programs, not just 1 and 2, but really this opens up the aperture, I think, for future research going down. Why is this important? Bottom line, again, failing at this leads to increase in risk, cost, schedule, and performance overruns of these programs. And last slide, please. I think this just opened up questions, but this will be for the group at large. Thank you.
All right. I noticed the grognards are not grumbling. You all need to get some questions out there. But I want to comment on your research, Commander Legg. I think it's brilliant. I mean, I've read your paper like 5 times, and then I listened to your brief, and then I finally get it. I'm a little slow sometimes. What I got was the importance of technology maturity assessments is the technology doesn't matter. It's about the user. That's what's important. That's what I got out of your paper. And I think that's brilliant. And that really echoes some of the earlier discussions in this whole symposium, which is, are we measuring the wrong things? And my mother used to tell me, you're putting the emphasis on the wrong syllables, David. And I, when we measure cost, schedule, and performance, we measure TRL. That's not what matters to the user. The user doesn't care about that. They want something that works. They want a thing that sinks the cruiser Moskva. And they don't really care how it gets there. They just want the ship on the bottom of the bad ship on the bottom of the ocean. And I think that came through in Bill's work, and I think it came through in what I presented. So at first, I thought your research was showing a negative result, which is good. It's important. Don't go there. But in fact, I find that you produce a very strong positive result, which is don't look over there, look over there. Look at the user, look what the user wants, and then do what the user wants. And that comports very much with what I've read about Silicon Valley, work that Bill did as well. So well done. So I think there was a question in there. So where do you think this should go? This type of research should go in the future, given what you found. Where do you see the next step going for your work? Over.
Thank you. I think there's probably 2 ways to look at it. One is when you consider there's at least 170 different types of assessment methods used by industry, and we are stuck on using TRL, again, which I mentioned is, a 1960s version, how to get industry-leading assessment methods and train DoD personnel to use those assessment methods so that we can apply them to the right place at the right time, as you said in your analogy, using the emphasis on the right syllable. I think we lack the training within the DoD currently to effectively assess technology maturity, and I think industry has surpassed us, and we need to leverage all of that learning and bring it into the DoD. And to your point more, just because you assess technology maturity, it doesn't mean that at the end of the day, that's what the user wants. So we have to learn how to incorporate what the user wants and their input in a either very regimented or in a very fluid, because again, the spectrum is out there on how to collect customer input. Again, industry has kind of developed expertise on that, but we need to leverage that and bring it into our own programs.
Okay, so there is a question from Alfred Schenker for Commander Legg. Have you got data that shows that the program failures were caused by immature technology?
I do not. And within the system of Dave's, you can get down to the cost, performance, and schedule data. Unfortunately, even as recognized by the GAO, it's very, very hard to aggregate that data and then crosswalk it back to what assessment method was used within those programs. Essentially, for anything other than an ACAT 1 level program, it becomes a science project to get all that info. I wish it were readily available, and I put it out there, and I do that quantitative analysis myself. But unfortunately, that data is just not readily available. And within the time limitations that I had to conduct that research, that was the largest obstacle.
Okay, well, thank you. So, Bill, I had a question for you. You went to the same place I went to, which was the difference between new starts and incremental upgrades, or you went much farther and much better than I did. So, do you see a preference for one or the other? And if there's a preference, why is that preference there? I think you already answered that, but I'll let you give it another roll. Over.
Well, I think in one sense, it depends on where we are. And if we're in a peacetime mode, incrementalism is probably fine. And we don't really have anybody chasing us or so on. So now we're in a situation where we have to do both. We have to essentially take existing capabilities and produce the heck out of them, because we're facing a shortage in capabilities in various regions of the world. But we're getting out manufactured and out ship, out, as far as shipbuilding goes, the numbers are not looking great. So we need to figure out, how do we leap ahead? And that's going to require focusing on disruptive innovation. So we have to do both. I mean, that's the reality. We just can't, shut things down and wait for something future. But we really have to focus on new things. And to go to Commander Legg's point, this is going to have to start with the user. And serial, we're going to have to bring things out and adopt the Silicon Valley approach, which was our own approach. Dave, that's exactly where we were in the 50s. We had an entirely different approach, which Silicon Valley took from us. They don't like to say that, but they did. And we don't like to recognize that actually what they've done is what we should have been doing for the last 50 years. And so now we're in some, kind of a world of hurt as far as threats and so on. And so we have to do both things, and we have to do them right. And that's going to be a real challenge, and it's going to require a different mindset and to do either one.
So I think what you're saying is everything we know is wrong. In the world I grew up in, the world you grew up in, the world Jeff grew up in, was a unique and special thing, and maybe doesn't apply anymore. So how do we take our workforce today, the audience right now, how do they transition out of that mindset and into what you're talking about, which I call an exploring approach to adoption, but into behaving differently at a pretty fundamental level? How do we as leaders, senior leaders, make that change in behavior? Over.
So from a senior leadership aspect, you're going to have to protect those individuals who are essentially trying to innovate like Silicon Valley. And you not only have to protect them, you have to reward them. And frankly, the other interesting thing about Silicon Valley and the commercial sector is many of their new innovations fail. And that's okay. Okay. In our system, in the DoD system, boy, if you have a failure, and how you define a failure is it's just, it's a career killer. And therefore everyone wants to just do, minor incremental innovation and then try to measure the heck out of it and make sure that we don't do the wrong thing again. But this is an entirely different way of doing things. But it was the way we did things, again, in the 50s. There's the Good Rickover. The Good Rickover created this incredibly fast, innovative new nuclear submarine capability, nuclear energy capability. And then I have to say, then there was the bad Rickover, who wanted to measure it all in the 1960s and led to the cost accounting standards and the idea of breaking down profit margins into the industrial base, and basically eventually just destroying the industrial base 20 years later. So it is leadership, because Rickover did both of those things. And so the new Rickovers of the Navy need to start looking and saying, we need to change the way we're doing things, and we need a different criteria and a different model. And frankly, that model's been sitting there staring us in the face for 50 or 60 years, and it's been sitting there over in Silicon Valley for the same amount of time, and we need to adopt it.
Okay. You used a term, I've been looking up your paper here, the VC power law model. Can you talk about that a little bit? You didn't discuss it in the brief, but
No,
I think it's exactly what you're describing.
no, absolutely. The VC power law model essentially is that this is the most important engine of innovation that the U.S. has. It's our comparative advantage. What do we have? We have lots of private capital money looking to essentially disrupt anything that it possibly can. And by disruption, what that means is they're looking for a 10x or greater return, or a 10x greater capability. And they're willing to see most of their investments fail to get that one 10x capability. So take a look at what was Falcon 9. Falcon 9 in SpaceX was something that was proposed that cost estimated cost by our cost estimators, 10% of what ULA and what the traditional defense acquisition system would do. 400 million versus 4 billion. Okay, so NASA took a flyer on them. They delivered, and what did we get? We got something that's disrupting the entire space system. We got disruption from 10x or more on measured by the cost of getting something delivered into space, all because the power law view, the VC-backed view, was looking for something this disruptive, but also needed government funding to do the fixed price contract to actually build the prototype.
Yeah. And I think that hooks back to Commander Legg's point about measuring the wrong things. So I went to SpaceX in one of my tours, and they were busy adding weight to rockets. Well, rule number one in rocketry is you don't add weight to rockets. But they were doing it to address the cost issue of having multiple reuse of rockets. I think 10 reuse was their objective. So the technology assessment would be you need to take weight off of the rocket, and that's the way to do it. The user perspective was, I want cheaper rockets. And so to do that, you had to be less sophisticated in your technology in order to reduce the user's cost. I think that's, Jeff, that's my golden nugget from you, is paying attention to the right thing. So that's, I like the way these things connect. Whoever put this panel together, you're a genius. Gary.
Well, and look how look at the impact of doing that. I mean, think about it. We wouldn't have had small satellites without launch capability that was cheaper. I mean, it just keeps going. And for those who are in this centralized mindset of, they got data-driven systems analysis from the 1960s, which divorced from time, divorced from innovation, but just as long as we can measure it, it must be good. Well, there are a lot of things you just can't measure, and a lot of things are intuitive. A lot of things are frankly basically a flyer. There's a risk that SpaceX took a risk to did that, but they knew what they were trying to do. And again, in the VC power law world, 9 out of 10 of those guys would have failed, but they succeeded, and they were the 1 out of 10. And obviously, that's the financial rewards that are getting, but also the innovation rewards that we're getting.
That's true. So there's a question for me from the our audience. For Dave Lewis, you mentioned that the Navy is today good more at exploiting existing technologies, and use the F-18 as an example. But the F-18 and other major capabilities like the Arleigh Burke DDG might look the same. Well, the program may be old, but the software and hardware capabilities have changed greatly since inception. Would you agree with this? Is flying an airframe today that looks old but does wildly different things really mean we're only exploiting technology? Yes. My response is yes, you're right. But back to Bill Greenwalt's point about fundamentally changing the nature, you're still bound by the box it comes in. The platform still drives what you can do. I'll say I'll talk about DDGs because I'm more familiar with them. They have power limitations. There's only so much electricity on a DDG, and unless you fundamentally change the ship, you're only going to get 9 to 12 megawatts of power. So if you got a big honking laser or a power hungry railgun or banks of batteries that you want to use for 100 UAVs or something, you can't do that in a DDG hull. So therefore, you're not going to do it. And if you can't build a new platform, then you can't do those things. So then your technology choices become constrained by this outside factor. The best example, I'll give an example. This might be a little bit of a stretch, but when the Japanese came out or abrogated the Washington Naval Treaty and started building battleships again in the 30s, they knew that because of the treaty limitations where I'm trying to remember the number, but they were allowed to have 3 for every 5 U.S. and British. I think that was the number. So they automatically started out behind the 8 ball in terms of numbers. So if they wanted to build a new battleship, it had to be substantially better than what America and England could produce. So they did an analysis. What's the biggest battleship the United States could build? Well, the United States is constrained by the Panama Canal. So they figured out what's the biggest ship you can put in a lock in the Panama Canal. And this is the 1930s, not the super canal of today. So then what's the biggest guns and the most armor you could put in a ship that would fit in that Panama Canal lock? And then we need to build a ship that can beat that. And that produced Yamato. It's 18-inch guns, 70,000 ton battleship, lots of armor, very capable. And the idea was that 3 of them could beat 5 of the American limited by the Panama Canal locks. And at least in gaming, I think that probably worked out. The problem was, of course, that battleships didn't matter anymore by the time the Yamato came out. Missed that bit. So that's where platforms constrain you. I realize that's a bit of a stretch, but if you really want to embrace autonomy, AI, edge to cloud, in those 4th industrial revolution technologies, at some point you're going to break the capability or the limitations of the box that you're flying around in the case of the F-18, or sailing around in the case of the ship. The DDG has a nice radar. It's got a great sonar. It's got great guns. It's got great missiles. Do they all have to be on the same platform? Can you spread them out? Can they be on 100 different smaller floaty things? I don't know, but right now we're constrained by the platform. F-18's got a lot of great capabilities. I think the aviation community has really embraced MOSA and modularity in the sense that you can hang anything under the wings of an F-18 and it'll work. B-52, you mentioned that, Bill, is, I think, the best example. Literally everything the Air Force makes can go on a B-52. So it's a 100-year airplane. I mean, my mother worked on the B-52. Her job title was computer. That's what she did. She computed for the engineers for the slide rule. She told me about that. It was a wonderful story. And that's why the B-52 has been around so long. But there are things you would want to do with an airframe that you can't hang on an airplane anymore. You would want to do more in the area of edge to cloud and AI. Can you put a data center in a B-52? No. Can you put a data center in an F-18? No. So now you have to start constraining yourself by by the limitations of the platform. And back in the day, which Bill was talking about, if you needed to build a ship with 18-inch guns, you built a new ship. It was pretty simple. If you needed to build a ship that could carry airplanes, you built yourself a new ship, a Langley or a Saratoga or a Lexington. If you needed something that could go under the water, shoot torpedoes, you built yourself a submarine. You were not constrained by the platforms that you had. That's exploring technology. Maybe it didn't work very well at first, but through exploitation, once you had explored that new technology, you could go beyond that. So my last example would be the IBM PC. I was around when that came out, 1982. I was using an IBM 360, 128-bit floating point CPU. That thing could crunch numbers like nobody's business. What could an 8-bit 8080 chip do comparison to that? This was nothing. This was a toy. Clearly, PCs were not going to ever compete with the big iron of an IBM 360, 370 plant. Well, how'd that pan out? Just like Bill has been talking about. So you're right, Brian. I think in the short term, I think the point here is to look at the long term. Yamato, thank you very much. Thanks for the correction. He got it right. So we have a few minutes left. Oh, I see some more questions. Oh, those were those two questions. Let me run back through our participants. Jeff, I'll start with you. If you have any closing comments on your work or this discussion, go ahead, Jeff.
No, I really wish we could get this type of information and this learning experience just out there across the DoD. I think this is a great format, and I thank you both gentlemen for the opportunity.
All right, and over to you, Bill. Any closing comments?
Well, I think what I did here was kind of based on how I've legislated, how I've written things, what the criteria was that I was trying to do things for. I think this is like an 80% solution. I would encourage anybody who reads this paper to pick it apart. I'm sure there are different, other enablers, let's have a dialogue. I'd like to this is a first iterative operational prototype. Let's put it that way. And so I'd like some serial operational prototyping and the ideas as we go forward. So if anyone wants to do that, I welcome it. My email is on the paper, and I do think we really have to move a lot faster. We need to go thinking about time, thinking about our adversaries, and we need to think a little bit differently the way. And Dave, your idea is exactly where we need to start. We have to start in a different mindset, a different culture, and so I think this has been a great panel. And thanks to you so much for having me participate.
And thank you all for listening. Bill mentioned Technology Trap. That's an awesome book. I recommend it. I would put it up with Innovator's Dilemma as one of the landmark innovation works. He's written one since then, which I've read, which title escapes me, but it's of similar caliber. So that's all we have today. So thank you very much. Appreciate you all's time, and appreciate your participation in this symposium, and look forward to having a future dialogue exactly like the two of you said. So thank you for your time and your fine work on the papers out here.